The iron tankard hit the wooden table with a hollow thud, and Greta Ashborn flexed her green fingers, rolling her wrist once, twice, listening to the small, satisfying pops of her knuckles as 24 pairs of eyes tracked the motion like hawks watching a rabbit. The autumn sun slanted through the open sides of the pavilion the homesteaders had erected at the crossroads, illuminating dust motes and the sweat already beading on the foreheads of the men who had signed their names to the work trial list. And Greta let a slow smile curve her lips, feeling the slight press of her lower tusks against her top lip, a reminder of exactly what she was and what she would never stop being. "Next," called old Merrick, the settlement coordinator. His weathered face creased into a map of skepticism as he glanced between his ledger and the orc woman who had beaten 7 men in a row without her elbow so much as wavering toward the table. A broad-shouldered farmer stepped forward, spat into his palm, and sat down across from her with the grim determination of a man defending his homestead from wolves. Greta met his eyes, saw the flicker of resentment there, the way his jaw worked as though chewing something bitter, and she understood it, even if she would never forgive it. Her people grazed the high plains that bordered these new human settlements, and every fence post the homesteaders drove into the ground was a line drawn, a border claimed, a piece of the world sectioned off and labeled mine. But this was the agreement. The territory marshal had decreed that the boundary dispute would be settled by a land survey, fair and legal, and that both sides would send someone to ride with the surveyor as witness. The human homesteaders would choose their witness today, and the orc clans had already chosen Greta, not because she was the strongest, though she was strong, but because she had a sharp memory for landmarks and a sharper tongue for liars. "Ready?" Merrick asked. Greta locked hands with the farmer, felt the calluses on his palm, the tremor of effort already gathering in his arm, and when Merrick barked "Go," she held steady, immovable, letting him burn himself out against her as though he were a wave crashing against a cliff. 30 seconds and his knuckles touched wood. Someone in the crowd swore. A woman laughed, high and nervous. "Enough of this," a voice cut through the murmur, and Greta looked up to see a man approaching from the road, dust on his boots, saddlebags slung over one shoulder, the kind of quiet competence in his stride that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair the color of turned earth and eyes like flint, and when he looked at the pavilion, at the crowd, at her, his expression was unreadable, carefully neutral in the way of someone who had learned to keep his thoughts behind a locked door. "Who's that?" muttered one of the farmers. "The surveyor," Merrick said, and relief washed through his voice like rain after drought. "About time, Mr. Everett." The man, Everett, nodded once. "The marshal sent word I was needed immediately. I rode through the night." His gaze swept the scene, paused on Greta, moved on. "This is the witness trial, arm wrestling," Merrick confirmed, and something that might have been amusement flickered in Everett's eyes, there and gone before Greta could be certain. "The orc clan sent Miss Ashborn. We are selecting our representative." "I see." Everett set down his saddlebags, rolled his shoulders, and looked at Greta directly for the first time. "May I?" It was the may that surprised her, the politeness of it, as though he were asking permission to join a card game rather than challenging her to a contest of strength. Greta gestured to the empty seat. "Sit." He did, and up close she could see the details the distance had obscured. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the old scar along his jawline, the way his hands, when he placed them on the table, were ink-stained around the fingernails, marked by the tools of his trade. A surveyor. A man who measured the world, who walked boundary lines and turned disputes into numbers, into maps, into something that could be agreed upon or argued over with words instead of blood. "Rules?" he asked Merrick, though his eyes stayed on Greta. "Standard. First to pin wins. And if I win, I ride as witness for the homesteaders. That's the arrangement." Everett nodded, extended his hand across the table. Greta took it, felt the strength there, not the brute force of the farmer, but something more deliberate, more controlled. Their eyes met, and she saw no hatred in his, no contempt, only a kind of wary assessment, the look of someone trying to solve a problem without all the necessary information. "Go," Merrick said. The pressure came immediately, steady and implacable, and Greta met it, pushed back, felt the strain sing through her forearm and into her shoulder. Everett's expression did not change, but she saw the tightness at the corners of his mouth, the way his breath steadied into the rhythm of someone prepared to endure. They held there, locked, neither gaining, and Greta realized with a start that this was the first time today she had been truly tested, seconds stretched. The crowd went quiet. Greta could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the grain of the wooden table under her other hand, could see the sunlight caught in the dust motes above Everett's head like a halo made of ordinary light. She pushed harder, felt him absorb the force, redirect it, and the world narrowed to the point of contact between them, skin on skin, will against will. Then, slowly, she felt the shift. Not a collapse, not a surrender, but a calculated yielding, his hand moving toward the table by inches, by fractions, and she followed the motion down until his knuckles brushed wood. Merrick's hand came down between them. Match to Ashborn. The crowd exhaled as one. Everett released her hand, flexed his fingers once and smiled, a small crooked thing that transformed his face from unreadable to something warmer, more human. "Well fought." "You let me win," Greta said flatly. "I lost," he corrected. "Whether I let you is a matter of interpretation." "Then interpret it for me." He stood, picked up his saddlebags, and looked down at her with those flint-colored eyes. "I am the surveyor. My job is to walk the line and mark it fairly, and both sides need to trust that I will do so. If I had beaten you, every decision I made would be questioned by your people as the act of a man who fought an orc for the right to witness. This way, we start on even ground." He paused. "Or as even as ground gets, out here on the border." Greta rose to face him, aware that even standing, they were nearly eye to eye, and that the crowd was watching this exchange with the avid attention of people who sensed a story unfolding. "You think losing makes you trustworthy." "I think recognizing when the fight matters, and when it does not, makes me competent," Everett said. "And competence is what this survey needs, Miss Ashborn, not pride." The words struck something in her chest, a chime rung by a hammer she had not seen coming, and before she could fashion a reply, he had turned to Merrick. "I will need to review the boundary claims tonight and start the survey at dawn. Where am I staying?" "The inn," Merrick said, still looking between Everett and Greta as though he had witnessed something significant but could not name it. "3 doors down. Miss Ashborn has a camp outside the settlement." "Then I will see you at dawn, Miss Ashborn," Everett said, tipping his head in a gesture that was not quite a bow, and walked away, leaving Greta standing in the pavilion with the iron tankard still on the table, and a strange heat burning in her chest that she told herself was anger but suspected might be something far more inconvenient. The crowd dispersed, muttering, and old Merrick shuffled his papers, not looking at her. "Never seen him throw a match before." He said he did not throw it, and I said I've never seen it before. Merrick glanced up, his old eyes sharp. "Be careful, girl. Everett is a good man, but he has been hurt, and hurt men do unpredictable things." "I do not need your warnings," Greta said, but she took them anyway, tucked them into the part of her mind that catalogued threats and weaknesses, and left the pavilion to walk back to the camp her people had made in the meadow beyond the settlement's edge. The orc clans had sent a dozen witnesses, not because they distrusted Greta, but because the boundary mattered and what mattered demanded attention. Her cousin Brock was sharpening a blade when she arrived, and he looked up with a grin that showed both his tusks. "Did you terrify them?" "I beat them. Same thing to humans." He sheathed the blade, stood stretched. "When do we start?" Dawn, the surveyor, arrived. And what? And what manner of man is he? Arrogant, stupid, the kind who will draw the line to favor his own and call it justice. Greta thought of Everett's steady hands, his careful words, the way he had framed his loss as strategy rather than weakness. "I do not know yet." "You always know," Brock said, frowning. "You read people like tracks in mud." "Then the mud is unclear," Greta snapped, and walked past him to her tent, needing the solitude, the space to think without her cousin's keen eyes tracking her every reaction. Inside the tent, she sat cross-legged on her bedroll and stared at her hands, at the green skin and the thick knuckles and the small scars that mapped a life spent working, fighting, surviving. She had made her vow 3 years ago, after the human trader had tried to buy her from her father as though she were a horse, after her father had laughed in the man's face, after the man had returned with friends and tried to take her by force. She had broken 2 of their arms and sent them running, but the memory of their hands on her, of their voices saying mine, claim, property, had burned itself into her like a brand. Never kneel to any man. The words had become her spine, her banner, the line she would not cross. She had said them in front of her clan, in front of the human settlements, in front of anyone who thought her strength or her body or her future was something they could negotiate or purchase or own. And she had meant them. But Everett had knelt, in a sense. He had yielded, had chosen to lose, and in doing so had given her the victory without making it feel like a gift. As though he understood that what she needed was not his deference but his respect. As though he saw her as an equal, a partner in this task, rather than an obstacle to be overcome or a prize to be won. It was a strange thing, respect. Greta had fought for it, earned it, demanded it, but she had never had it offered so quietly, so matter-of-factly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to treat an orc woman as someone worth listening to. She did not know what to do with that. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the camp, the low conversations in Orcish, the crackling of the fire, the howl of a distant coyote. Greta slept fitfully, her dreams tangled with images of boundary lines and iron tankards and flint-colored eyes, and when the first pale light of dawn crept through the tent flap, she rose with a sense of relief, glad to leave the confusion of sleep for the clarity of work. Everett was waiting at the edge of the settlement, his horse saddled, his surveying equipment strapped to the pack mule beside him. He had changed into working clothes, sturdy and practical, and he nodded to her as she approached on foot, carrying her own pack. "Miss Ashborn, surveyor." "Everett," he said, "if we are going to spend the next several weeks walking every disputed inch of this border, we should probably use names." "Greta," she allowed. He smiled, that same small, crooked smile. "Good, shall we?" They set out north, following the line where the high plains met the foothills, and Everett explained his process as they walked, his voice steady and methodical. "The homesteaders claim everything south of Black Pine Creek. Your people claim the grazing rights extend to the old stone cairns. We will walk both lines, take measurements, consult the original territory maps, and determine what is legal and what is fair. Fair and legal are not always the same thing. And when they are not, then we argue until we find a compromise, or we take it to the territorial court." He glanced at her. But I prefer compromise. Courts are expensive and slow, and by the time they make a decision, people have usually done something stupid. Like start a war. Like start a war, he agreed. They walked in silence for a time, Greta matching his pace easily, her longer legs making the rough terrain seem less daunting than it was. She watched him work, saw the way he paused to sight along a ridge, the way he marked notes in his leather journal, the care he took to record not just distances but landmarks, soil types, water sources. This was a man who understood that a map was not just lines on paper but a story about the land, about who lived there and how they used it. "You have done this before," she said, "for 8 years. Before that, I apprenticed with the territorial surveyor." He knelt to drive a stake into the ground, tied a bright red cloth to the top. "I have walked more boundary lines than I can count." "And do you always lose arm wrestling matches to build trust?" he laughed, a genuine surprised sound. "No. Usually I just show up and do the work. But this situation is more delicate than most. Because I am an orc. Because there have been incidents," he said carefully, standing and brushing dirt from his knees. "Fences cut, cattle driven off, a homesteader's son beaten badly enough to lose an eye. Your people and mine are one bad season away from open conflict, and this survey is the thread holding the piece together." He met her eyes. "So yes, I lost an arm wrestling match. It seemed a small price for the possibility of preventing bloodshed." Greta studied him, searching for the lie, the hidden condescension, the patronizing belief that he knew what was best for everyone involved. But all she saw was weariness, the kind that came from caring too much, from carrying the weight of other people's futures. "The homesteader's son started that fight," she said. "He tried to take one of our young women against her will. The beating was a kindness compared to what some wanted to do." Everett's jaw tightened. "That was not in the report, because humans do not believe orcs." "I believe you," he said quietly, "and I will amend my records." Something shifted in Greta's chest, a loosening of a knot she had not realized she was carrying. "Why?" "Because it is the truth, and my job is to record the truth." He adjusted the pack on the mule, checked the knots. "And because, if we are going to work together, we need to start with honesty. I cannot afford to trust the wrong information, and you cannot afford to work with someone who dismisses what you say." They continued north, and as the morning wore into afternoon, Greta found herself talking more than she had intended, pointing out the places where her people traditionally grazed their herds, the springs that ran year-round, the meadows that flooded in spring and turned to hard, packed earth by autumn. Everett listened, asked questions, made notes, and never once suggested that her knowledge was less valuable than the maps he carried. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they had covered nearly 10 miles, and Everett called a halt near a stand of cottonwoods where a creek burbled over smooth stones. "We will camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we will continue to the northern edge of the disputed territory." Greta helped him unsaddle the horse and unload the mule, and they worked in companionable silence, the kind that came from shared labor. Everett built a fire with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent many nights in the field, and Greta unpacked the dried meat and flatbread from her own supplies. "You do not have to share," Everett said, but he was watching the food with the eyes of a hungry man. "You shared your expertise today. I share my food tonight. It is fair." "Fair," he repeated and smiled. "I like the way you think, Greta Ashborn." They ate as the stars began to prick through the darkening sky, and the conversation drifted from the survey to other things, small things, the kind of details that turned a stranger into a person. Everett told her about learning to survey from his mentor, an old man who could read the land like a book, and who had taught him that every hill and valley had a story. Greta told him about growing up in the high plains, about learning to track game with her father, about the first time she had defended the herd from a mountain lion, and how proud her mother had been. "You are close with your family," Everett observed. "We are clan. Clan is everything." She paused. "Are you close with yours?" His expression shuddered, the warmth draining away as though a door had closed. "I have a sister. We write occasionally. My parents passed several years ago." There was more there, Greta sensed, a story he was not telling, but she did not push. Everyone had wounds they kept private. Instead, she said, "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night. "What about you? Any siblings?" "3 brothers, 2 sisters, more cousins than I can count. We are a loud family." She grinned. "My mother says we could wake the dead with our arguments. And yet here you are, alone, the clan's representative. Because I am the best at remembering details and the worst at holding my tongue. They decided those qualities made me ideal for dealing with humans." She glanced at him. "Was that an insult or a compliment?" "Both, I expect." They laughed, and the sound was strange out here, under the vast sky. 2 people from different worlds sharing a joke as though it were the most natural thing. Greta felt something warm and fragile growing in her chest, something she did not have a name for, and she told herself it was only gratitude, only the relief of being treated as a person instead of a problem. But when she lay down to sleep, wrapped in her blanket with the fire crackling low, she found herself thinking not about the survey or the boundary or the weight of her responsibilities, but about the way Everett had smiled at her, crooked and genuine, and the way his voice had gentled when he spoke about his mentor. She was still thinking about it when she finally fell asleep. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. They walked, measured, argued over interpretations of the maps, and slowly, inch by inch, began to assemble a picture of where the legal boundary lay. Everett was meticulous, checking his measurements twice, consulting old surveys, and when Greta pointed out that a particular section of the map was outdated because a landslide had altered the creek bed 5 years ago, he did not dismiss her but instead hiked to the site to verify, then thanked her for the correction. It was this, more than anything, that undid her, the way he listened, the way he treated her knowledge as equal to his own, the way he asked her opinion and then actually considered it, rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. They argued, of course, about whether a particular ridge counted as a natural boundary, about the difference between grazing rights and land ownership, about the ethics of the homesteaders claiming land that the Orc clans had used for generations. But the arguments were not battles. They were conversations, explorations, 2 minds working together to find a solution that neither of them would have reached alone. And somewhere in the midst of those conversations, Greta realized she was falling. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning strike. It was gradual, cumulative, the way a river carved a canyon. It was the way he handed her his canteen without comment when hers ran dry. The way he pointed out a hawk circling overhead, just because he thought she would appreciate the sight. The way he asked her to teach him a few words of Orcish, and then practiced them with such terrible pronunciation that she laughed until her sides ached. It was the way he looked at her, not with hunger or possession, but with something softer, something that felt like recognition. As though he saw not an Orc woman or a representative of the clans, but Greta, just Greta, in all her complexity and contradiction. And it terrified her, because she had sworn she would never kneel to any man, and falling in love felt dangerously close to kneeling. It felt like yielding, like surrendering the hard-won independence she had fought for, like giving someone the power to hurt her in ways that fists and swords never could. So she tried to pull back, to rebuild the walls, to remind herself that this was only a job, that Everett was only a colleague, that when the survey was done they would return to their separate lives, and this strange intimacy would fade like morning mist. But the walls would not hold. It was on a cool afternoon in late autumn, with the aspens turning gold and the air sharp with the promise of winter, that everything came to a head. They had reached the northernmost point of the disputed territory, a high meadow where the stone cairns Greta's people had built generations ago still stood, weathered but intact. Everett examined them carefully, measured their positions, and then stood staring at his maps with a frown. "What is it?" Greta asked. According to the original territorial survey, these cairns mark the edge of unclaimed land, but the homesteaders' deeds describe their northern boundary as extending to the ridgeline, which is another 3 miles north of here. He looked up. Legally, they have a claim. But historically, this has been your people's grazing land. So what do? We have 2 options. We can follow the letter of the law and give the homesteaders everything their deeds describe, which will push your people south and likely cause conflict. Or we can argue that the deeds were issued in error, based on incomplete surveys, and recommend that the boundary be redrawn at the cairns. And which do you recommend? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from the maps to the cairns to the sweep of the meadow, and when he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I recommend we redraw the boundary at the cairns. The homesteaders have plenty of land south of here. This meadow matters more to your people, and it is the right thing to do. But it is not the legal thing. It is legal if we document the original survey error and petition the territorial court." He met her eyes. "It will take time and the homesteaders will fight it, but I believe we can win." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you risk your reputation, your standing with your own people, to argue for ours?" "Because it is the truth," he said simply. "Because your people have been here for generations, and the land remembers that even if the deeds do not. And because I have walked every inch of this boundary with you, Greta, and I trust you. If you say this matters, then it matters." The warmth in her chest flared into something hotter, something that made her breath catch, and she turned away, staring at the cairns because she could not look at him without revealing too much. "You do not know what you are offering. The homesteaders will call you a traitor. They will say you were compromised, that you let an orc woman sway you. Let them say it. It will ruin you. Or it will prove that I care more about justice than popularity." His voice was closer now, and she realized he had moved to stand beside her. "Greta, I do not make this recommendation lightly. I have thought about it, weighed the evidence, considered the consequences, and I believe this is right. Because you trust me. Yes." She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes stole the words from her throat. There was no calculation there, no hidden agenda. Only honesty, raw and unguarded, the look of a man who had decided to lay his cards on the table and let the game play out as it would. "Why?" she asked again, quieter this time. "Because somewhere between the arm wrestling match and this moment, I stopped seeing you as the clan's representative and started seeing you as the most remarkable woman I have ever met." He smiled, rueful. "And because I am tired of pretending otherwise." The world narrowed to the space between them, to the sound of her heart pounding in her ears, to the way the afternoon light caught in his hair and turned it the color of rich soil. She wanted to step closer. She wanted to run. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same, that the past 2 weeks had unraveled her carefully constructed walls and left her vulnerable in ways she had never allowed herself to be. But the vow rose in her mind like a ghost: never kneel to any man, and the words stuck in her throat. Everett seemed to sense her struggle because he stepped back, giving her space. I am not asking for anything, Greta. I just needed you to know, in case it matters. It matters, she said, and her voice came out rough, unsteady. But I do not know what to do with it. Then do not do anything. Not yet. He turned back to the cairns, to the work, to the safe territory of surveys and measurements. Let us finish the job first. The rest can wait. But the rest could not wait. Not really, because it was already there. A presence between them that colored every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of companionable silence. And as they made their way back south, retracing their steps and compiling the final report, Greta felt the weight of it growing, pressing against her ribs like a living thing. She thought about talking to Brock, to her mother, to someone who might have wisdom to offer. But she knew what they would say. They would remind her that humans could not be trusted, that the history between their peoples was written in blood and betrayal, that a vow made before the clan was sacred. And they would not be wrong, but they would not be entirely right either. Because Everett was not the trader who had tried to buy her, or the homesteader's son who had attacked one of her people. He was something else, something that did not fit neatly into the categories she had built to protect herself. And that was what made him dangerous. The survey took another week to complete, and by the time they returned to the settlement with the final maps and the written recommendation for the boundary adjustment, autumn had given way to the first whispers of winter. The homesteaders gathered in the pavilion to hear Everett's findings, and Greta stood beside him, aware of every hostile gaze, every muttered comment, every flicker of resentment. Everett laid out the maps, explained the original survey error, and presented the case for redrawing the boundary at the stone cairns. His voice was calm, factual, unshakable, and when the homesteaders erupted in protests, he stood his ground. "This is a betrayal," one of the farmers shouted. "You were supposed to represent us." "I represent the truth," Everett said. "And the truth is that the original survey was incomplete. If we follow the deeds as written, we are claiming land based on faulty information. Faulty because she said so." The farmer jabbed a finger at Greta. "You let an orc trick you." "Miss Ashborn provided accurate historical information that I verified independently," Everett said, his tone hardening. "If you want to challenge my findings, you can petition the territorial court, but I will stand by this report." Old Merrick, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "And what if the court does not agree? What if they uphold the deeds? Then the homesteaders will have their land, and the orc clans will have legal grounds to appeal." Everett folded his arms. "But I believe the court will see the merit in this recommendation. It is fair, it is based on solid evidence, and it prevents conflict. That is what the territorial government wants: peace, not war." The room buzzed with arguments, with anger, with fear, and Greta watched it all with a sinking feeling in her stomach. This was what Everett had risked for her people. His reputation, his relationships, the trust of the community that employed him. And he had done it without hesitation, because he believed it was right, because he trusted her. The meeting broke up without resolution, the homesteaders agreeing only to review the report and discuss it further. Greta and Everett walked out into the cold evening air, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "That did not go well," Greta said finally. "It went about as well as I expected." Everett rubbed the back of his neck, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "They will come around. Or they will not, and the court will decide. Either way, the work is done. And now what? Now I submit the report to the territorial office and we wait. And us?" The question came out before she could stop it, and she saw him go still, saw the careful mask slip back into place. "What about us? You said something 3 weeks ago at the cairns. You said you saw me as remarkable." "I did." He turned to face her and the mask cracked just a little. I do. I do not know how to do this, Greta said, and the admission felt like pulling out a splinter, painful and necessary. I do not know how to let someone matter without losing myself. I swore I would never kneel to any man, and I meant it. I meant it because I had to, because kneeling meant being owned, being broken. I know, Everett said softly. I heard about your vow. Half the territory has heard about it. Then you understand why I cannot. I am not asking you to kneel, he interrupted. I am not asking you to give up your independence or your strength or anything that makes you who you are. I am asking if you would consider letting me stand beside you, as an equal, as a partner. The words hit her like a stone to the chest, and she stared at him, at the honesty in his face, the vulnerability he was offering. Why? Because I am tired of being alone. Because I have spent the last 3 years believing that I am someone people leave, someone not worth staying for, and you make me think that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I just had not met the right person. He smiled, small and uncertain. Maybe I had not met you. Greta felt something crack inside her, a shell she had built around her heart, and the emotion that flooded through the break was so fierce it made her dizzy. But fear came with it, sharp and cold. What if I hurt you? What if you hurt me? Then we will hurt, Everett said. And we will heal, and we will try again. That is what people do, Greta. They take the risk. I am not good at risk. You walked a boundary line with a human surveyor for a month, knowing that your people and mine were one spark away from war. You are better at risk than you think. She laughed, a shaky, breathless sound. You are insufferable. I have been told that before. They stood there in the gathering dark, the settlement behind them and the open plains ahead, and Greta felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders. She could walk away. She could return to her clan, report that the survey was complete, and never see Everett again. It would be safe. It would be easy. It would be a lie, because the truth was she had already fallen. Somewhere between the arm wrestling match and the stone cairns, between the shared meals and the arguments and the quiet moments of understanding, she had let him matter. And now the only question was whether she was brave enough to admit it. I need time, she said finally. To think. To talk to my family. Take all the time you need, Everett said. I will be here. She wanted to ask him how he could be so certain, how he could stand there offering his heart as though it were a simple thing, but the words would not come. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand. Just once, a brief press of her fingers against his, and then she turned and walked away before she could change her mind. The camp was quiet when she arrived, most of her people already asleep. Brock was on watch, and he looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. How did the meeting go? Badly. Everett recommended redrawing the boundary at the cairns. The homesteaders are angry. And the surveyor, is he trustworthy? Greta thought about the way Everett had stood in front of the hostile crowd, defending his findings, defending her. Yes, you sound certain. I am. Brock studied her for a long moment, and then he sighed. You fell for him. It was not a question, but Greta answered anyway. Yes. Does he know? He knows. And I do not know what to do about it. She sank down beside the fire, staring into the flames. I swore I would never kneel to any man, Brock. That vow is part of who I am, but Everett is not asking me to kneel. He is asking me to stand beside him. And I do not know if I can do that without breaking the vow. The vow was about not being owned, Brock said slowly. About not letting someone take your strength, your choices, your future. If this man is not trying to take those things, then how is standing beside him breaking the vow? Because it feels like yielding, or it feels like choosing, Brock countered. There is a difference between kneeling because you are forced and choosing to build something with someone who respects you. Greta looked at her cousin, surprised. When did you become wise? I have always been wise. You just do not listen, he grinned. Talk to your mother, she will have better advice than I can offer, so Greta did. She rode back to the main camp the next day, where the rest of the clan was waiting for news of the survey, and found her mother in the cook tent, stirring a pot of stew that smelled like home. Greta, her mother said, looking up with a smile that faded when she saw her daughter's face. What is wrong? And Greta told her everything. About the survey, about Everett, about the way he had stood up for the clans even though it cost him, about the way he made her feel seen, valued, respected, about the fear that falling for him meant breaking the vow that had become her foundation. Her mother listened without interrupting, and when Greta finally ran out of words, she set down the spoon and took her daughter's hands. Do you remember why you made that vow? Because the trader tried to buy me. Because men kept treating me like property. And has this surveyor treated you like property? No. Has he tried to break you, to own you, to take away your choices? No. Then the vow is not about him, Greta. It is about you, about protecting yourself from being made small. Her mother squeezed her hands. But love does not make you small. The right love makes you larger, stronger, more than you were alone. If this man sees you, truly sees you, and stands beside you as an equal, then you are not breaking your vow by choosing him. You are honoring it because you are choosing from a place of strength, not fear. Greta felt tears prick her eyes, hot and unexpected. What if I am wrong? What if he leaves or changes? Or then you will survive, her mother said firmly. Because you are my daughter and you are strong enough to survive anything. But Greta, you are also strong enough to take the risk, to choose happiness, even when it is frightening. The tears spilled over, and Greta let her mother pull her into an embrace, let herself be held the way she had not allowed herself to be held in years. And in that moment, wrapped in her mother's arms with the smell of stew and wood smoke surrounding her, she made her choice. She would take the risk. The territorial office took 3 weeks to review Everett's report, 3 weeks during which Greta stayed with her clan and tried to keep busy, tried not to think about flint-colored eyes and crooked smiles. But she thought about them anyway, constantly, obsessively, until Brock finally told her to stop moping and go find the man. I am not moping, Greta protested. You are absolutely moping. Go. So she rode back to the settlement, her heart pounding like a drum, and asked where Everett was staying. The innkeeper directed her to a small cabin at the edge of town, and Greta stood outside for a long moment, gathering her courage before finally knocking. Everett opened the door, and the surprise on his face melted into something warmer, something that made her chest ache. Greta. Can I come in? Of course. He stepped aside and she entered the cabin, taking in the tidy space, the maps spread on the table, the surveying equipment neatly stored in the corner. It was Spartan, practical, the home of a man who traveled often and put down shallow roots. You said you would wait, Greta said, turning to face him. You said you would be here. I did. I am. I talked to my family, I talked to my mother, and I thought about what you said about standing beside you. Everett went very still. And I am afraid, Greta admitted. I am afraid of being hurt, of losing myself, of breaking the vow I made. But I am more afraid of walking away from you and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just in front of her, close enough that she could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the hope and fear warring in his eyes. Greta, I need you to know something. I was engaged once 3 years ago. Her name was Alina, and she left me at the altar for a man with a title and land and everything I could not offer. It broke something in me, made me believe that I was someone people traded up from, someone not worth staying for, and I have carried that belief like a weight ever since. Everett, but you, he continued, his voice rough. You make me think I was wrong. You see me, not what I can offer or what title I carry, but me. And I see you, Greta Ashborn. I see your strength, your integrity, your fierce loyalty to your people. And I want to stand beside you, not because I want to own you, but because I think we could build something together that neither of us could build alone. Greta reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of stubble, the warmth of his skin. I see you too, Everett. And I want to try. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, and for a moment they just stood there, breathing, letting the enormity of the choice settle over them. Then he opened his eyes and smiled, crooked and genuine, and Greta felt something in her chest unfurl, light and fragile and impossibly hopeful. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we figure it out together," Everett said. "One step at a time." They did not kiss, not then. It felt too soon, too fragile, and Greta appreciated that he did not push, did not assume. Instead, they sat at the table and talked about the survey, about the future, about the practicalities of building a life that spanned two worlds. It was not romantic, exactly, but it was real, and reality was what Greta needed. The territorial office approved Everett's recommendation 2 days later, ruling that the boundary would be redrawn at the stone cairns, and that the homesteader's deeds would be amended to reflect the corrected survey. The homesteaders grumbled, but there was no violence, no conflict, only the slow, grudging acceptance of a decision made by people with more authority than they possessed. Greta brought the news to her clan, and the celebration lasted through the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed a small army. Everett was invited, and he came, looking awkward and out of place until Greta pulled him into the circle and taught him the steps to a traditional dance. He was terrible at it, all left feet and mistimed turns, but he laughed and tried, and by the end of the night her people were clapping him on the back and offering him food and treating him like one of their own. "You survived," Greta said later when the fire had burned low and most of the clan had drifted off to their tents. "Barely," Everett said, but he was smiling. "Your people are terrifying, they like you. How can you tell? They did not threaten to throw you off a cliff. That is high praise." He laughed, and the sound was so warm, so unguarded that Greta felt her heart swell. They were sitting side by side on a log, their shoulders touching, and she realized that this simple companionship, was what she had been missing her entire life. Not grand gestures or declarations, but the quiet comfort of someone who saw her and chose to stay. Winter came, and with it the hard work of maintaining the peace. Everett continued his surveying work, and Greta went with him when she could, acting as liaison between the clans and the human settlements. It was not easy. There were still tensions, still incidents, still people on both sides who saw the boundary as a line to be crossed rather than respected. But slowly, inch by inch, progress was made, and through it all, Greta and Everett built their relationship. They argued about politics and laughed over meals and spent long evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. They kissed for the first time on a snowy afternoon when Everett slipped on ice and Greta caught him, and the kiss was cold and awkward and perfect. They made love for the first time in the spring, in a meadow full of wildflowers, and it was tender and uncertain and everything Greta had not known she needed. And through it all, Greta never knelt. She stood beside him, equal and strong, and Everett stood beside her, never asking for more than she could give, never trying to take what was not offered. It was enough. It was more than enough. The proposal came in the autumn, a year after the survey had concluded. The territorial court had officially ratified the new boundary, and the homesteaders and the Orc clans had signed a treaty outlining grazing rights, water access, and dispute resolution procedures. It was a good treaty, a fair one, and Everett had been instrumental in drafting it. They were standing at the stone cairns again, the place where everything had changed, and Greta was pointing out the new growth in the meadow, the way the grasses had recovered after a year of carefully managed grazing, when she realized that Everett had gone quiet. She turned to find him on one knee, his hand outstretched, a simple silver ring resting on his palm, her breath caught. "Greta Ashborn," Everett said, and his voice was steady but his hand trembled. "I know you swore you would never kneel to any man, so I am kneeling first. Not to make you kneel, but to show you that I will go lower than you ever feared being pushed. I will kneel, I will bend, I will do whatever it takes to build a life with you. Because you are the strongest, fiercest, most remarkable person I have ever known, and I want to stand beside you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Greta could not speak. She stared at him, at the ring, at the way he knelt in the grass with his heart in his eyes, and she felt everything she had built to protect herself crumble and reform into something new, something that included him. "Get up," she said, her voice rough. Everett's face fell and he started to rise, but Greta stepped forward and took his hand, pulling him up until they stood face to face, level and equal. "I do not want you on your knees," she said fiercely. "I want you beside me, always beside me." Understanding dawned in his eyes and he smiled, that crooked smile that had undone her from the first day. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," Greta said and kissed him, hard and deep, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathless, she held out her hand. "Put the ring on." He did, and the silver band caught the afternoon light, simple and perfect, and Greta looked at it and thought about vows. About the one she had made 3 years ago, never kneel to any man, and about the new vow she was about to make, to stand beside this man for the rest of her life. They were not contradictions. They were both rooted in strength, in choice, in the refusal to be anything less than she was. "When?" Everett asked. "When what? When do you want to get married?" Greta thought about her family, about the logistics of blending 2 cultures, 2 worlds. "We will need to talk to the clan elders and your sister and figure out where we are going to live. My cabin is small. Then we will build a bigger one. Together." "Together," Everett repeated and pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I like the sound of that." They married in the spring, in the meadow by the stone cairns, with her clan on one side and the human settlers on the other. It was a strange wedding, a blending of traditions, with orcish songs and human vows and a feast that lasted through the night. Greta wore a dress the color of new leaves, and Everett wore his best shirt, and when they stood before the assembled crowd and spoke their promises, Greta felt the weight of her old vow lift, replaced by something lighter, something that felt like freedom. "I swear to stand beside you," she said, "as your equal, your partner, your companion. I will not kneel and I will not ask you to kneel. We will build this life together, side by side." "I swear to honor your strength," Everett said, "to respect your choices, to stand with you in all things. I will not ask you to be less than you are. I will only ask that you let me be more because of you." The crowd cheered, and someone started playing a fiddle, and Greta and Everett danced in the meadow as the sun set and the stars came out. 2 people from different worlds building something new. They built a house on the border, halfway between the settlement and the clan camp. A sturdy structure of wood and stone that could withstand the harsh winters and the fierce summer storms. Greta continued her work as a liaison, and Everett continued his surveys, and together they became a bridge between the 2 communities, proof that peace was possible, that love could cross boundaries that seemed insurmountable. It was not always easy. There were still people who disapproved, who muttered about mixed marriages and diluted bloodlines and the dangers of trusting the other side. But Greta and Everett faced those challenges together, with patience and determination, and the quiet certainty that they had chosen right. 2 years after the wedding, Greta gave birth to a son, a squalling green-skinned baby with his father's eyes and his mother's fierce spirit. They named him Torin, and he was the first of many, a symbol of the new world they were building, one child at a time. Brock visited often, bringing news from the clan and teasing Greta about how domestic she had become. "I never thought I would see the day," he said, watching her rock Torin to sleep. Greta Ashborn, the woman who swore she would never kneel, singing lullabies. "I did not kneel," Greta said, looking up with a smile. "I chose. There is a difference." "There is," Brock agreed, and his expression softened. "And you chose well, cousin." Everett's sister visited too, a quiet woman named Iris who had been skeptical of the marriage but warmed when she saw the way Everett and Greta looked at each other, the easy affection, the deep respect. "I am glad you found her," Iris told her brother. "Eleanor did not deserve you." "I know," Everett said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet contentment. "I found who I was meant to find." The years passed, measured in harvests and snowfalls and the growth of their children. Torin was joined by a second son, Kieran, who had his mother's green skin and his father's careful hands, and then by a third son, Matthias, who was human in appearance but orcish in temperament, fierce and stubborn and impossible to discourage. The house rang with laughter and arguments and the chaos of a growing family, and Greta loved every moment of it. She had never imagined this life, never dreamed that she could have both her independence and a partnership, both her strength and the softness of being loved. But here it was, real and solid and hers. One evening when the children were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Greta and Everett sat on the porch, watching the stars. Everett had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Greta knew what he was asking. Not the marriage, not the life they had built, but the vow she had made all those years ago, the declaration that she would never kneel. "No," she said. "I never kneel, but I stand beside you, and that is better." "Better," Everett repeated and kissed the top of her head. "I agree." They sat there until the night grew cold, until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon rose full and bright, two people who had taken a risk and found something worth keeping. And when they finally went inside to the warmth of their home and the sleeping breaths of their children, Greta thought about the girl she had been, the one who had sworn never to kneel, and she knew that girl would be proud, because she had not knelt, she had chosen. And that had made all the difference. The seasons turned and the children grew, and the boundary between the orc clans and the human settlers became less a line of division and more a meeting place, a space where two worlds overlapped and created something new. Greta and Everett were not solely responsible for that change, but they were part of it, a living example that differences could be bridged, that love could be stronger than fear. And through it all, Greta kept her vow. She never knelt, not to Everett, not to anyone. But she stood beside him, equal and strong, and together they built a life that neither of them could have imagined alone. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, Greta stood at the stone cairns again, the place where everything had changed. Everett stood beside her, his hair now streaked with silver, his hands still steady but marked by age. They had walked this boundary line together for decades, had watched the meadow bloom and fade and bloom again, had seen the peace they helped create take root and grow. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Everett asked. "I remember everything," Greta said. "I remember you telling me that the boundary was wrong, that it needed to be redrawn. I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish. And which was I?" "Both," Greta said and smiled. Always both, he laughed, and the sound was warm, familiar, the soundtrack to her life. I would do it again, all of it. The survey, the conflict with the homesteaders, the risk. I would do it all again for you. I know, Greta said and took his hand. And I would let you. Because you knelt first, and you showed me that love does not mean losing yourself. It means finding someone who helps you become more. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had taken a risk and found a life beyond their imagining. And when the stars came out, they walked back to the house they had built together, hand in hand, still equal, still strong, still standing side by side. It was enough. It was everything.